You've been called distant, cold, antisocial, and maybe you've started to believe it yourself. Maybe you've looked at the way others move through the world, always surrounded, always connected, always available, and wondered what's wrong with you. Why you need the silence, why you crave the space, why being alone doesn't feel like loneliness but like coming home. But here's what nobody tells you, what nobody wants you to understand because it threatens the entire social contract we've built our lives around. Your preference for solitude isn't a deficiency. It's not emotional damage or social failure or some tragic inability to connect. It's something far more essential, far more sacred and far more threatening to a world that profits from your constant availability. It's sovereignty. And sovereignty, real sovereignty over your own energy and attention and inner world, terrifies people who've never tasted it themselves. Let me take you somewhere most people never go. Into the actual psychology behind solitude. Not the romanticized version. Not the Instagram aesthetic of alone time with perfect lighting and curated peace. The real thing. The deep structure of why some minds are built differently. Why some nervous systems require isolation not as escape but as fuel. And why this difference has been pathologized and misunderstood for generations. Because when you understand the truth about solitude, when you see it for what it actually is, everything changes. The guilt dissolves. The self-doubt evaporates. And what remains is something pure and undeniable. The recognition that you've been protecting something precious all along, even when the world told you that protection was the problem. The first thing you need to understand is that human beings exist on a spectrum of social energy requirements. And this isn't preference, it's neurobiology. Your brain, your actual physical brain, processes social interaction differently than someone who thrives in constant company. Studies in neuropsychology have shown that introverted and highly sensitive individuals experience greater activation in the prefrontal cortex during social situations, meaning your brain is working harder, processing more, filtering more stimuli, managing more internal data when you're around people. This isn't weakness. This is depth. Your mind is running complex background processes that others simply don't have, analyzing social dynamics at levels most people never access, reading emotional undercurrents, managing empathic overflow, protecting your energy from invasion. While someone else is having a surface-level conversation and feeling energized, you're simultaneously tracking tone, body language, unspoken tension, emotional authenticity, power dynamics, and your own internal response to all of it. You're not just socializing, you're processing an entire ecosystem of information, and that inevitably requires recovery time. Alone time isn't avoidance, it's restoration. It's the essential pause your system needs to integrate everything it absorbed, to reset the nervous system to return to baseline. Without it, you don't just get tired, you start to fragment. But society doesn't reward this truth. Society rewards constant availability, endless sociability, the performance of connection even when nothing real is being exchanged. From childhood, you were probably taught that wanting to be alone was concerning, that preferring your own company meant something was wrong, that if you just tried harder, opened up more, said yes more often, you'd be happier. And maybe you tried. Maybe you forced yourself into social situations that drained you. Maybe you smiled through gatherings that felt like endurance tests. Maybe you convinced yourself that the exhaustion was normal, that everyone felt this way, that you just needed to push through. But the exhaustion never became normal. The drain never stopped. And eventually, if you were lucky, if you were brave, you stopped pretending. You started honoring the truth your body had been screaming at you all along, that your energy is finite, that your peace is sacred, and that protecting both isn't selfishness, it's survival. Here's where it gets deeper. The people who prefer solitude aren't running from connection. They're running from false connection. They're running from the exhausting performance of intimacy without substance, from small talk that goes nowhere, from relationships built on convenience rather than resonance, from social obligations that serve everyone except them. Because when you're someone who experiences the world with heightened sensitivity, when your nervous system picks up on everything, you can't participate in shallow interaction without feeling the cost. You feel the inauthenticity. You feel the energy mismatch. You feel the way people engage with your surface while remaining utterly uninterested in your depths. And that's not connection. That's extraction. That's people using your presence to fill their own void while giving nothing of substance in return. And your solitude, your preference to be alone, is your psyche's way of refusing that extraction. It's your inner wisdom saying, I will not spend my limited energy on interactions that diminish me. I will not pretend that noise is the same as connection. I will not sacrifice my peace for the comfort of people who don't even see me. This is where the concept of selective sovereignty comes in. You're not antisocial. You're selectively social. You're not incapable of connection. You're incapable of false connection. There's a profound difference, and most people will never understand it because they've never had to make that distinction. They can engage socially without the cost you pay. They can small talk without feeling like they're betraying something essential in themselves. They can attend events and gatherings and parties and come away feeling filled rather than depleted. But you can't. Not because you're broken, but because your system is calibrated differently. You're wired for depth, for meaning, for authentic exchange, and anything less than that registers as a threat to your energy, to your truth, to your sense of self. So you withdraw. Not because you hate people, but because you love yourself enough to protect what's real in you from what's fake in the world. And that, whether anyone tells you this or not, is an act of profound self-respect. But let's go even deeper into the shadow side of this. Because solitude, real solitude, forces you to face something most people spend their entire lives avoiding: themselves. When you're alone, truly alone, without distraction or noise or the buffer of other people's energy, you meet yourself. Not the version you perform for others, not the mask you wear to stay safe or accepted or liked. The real you, the hurt you, the angry you, the scared you, the parts you've hidden, the feelings you've suppressed, the truths you've been too afraid to speak. And most people can't handle that confrontation. Most people need the constant presence of others precisely to avoid it. They need the noise to drown out the voice inside them that asks the hard questions. They need the validation to cover up the shame. They need the distraction to keep running from the emptiness they fear lives at their core. But you, whether by choice or necessity, have learned to sit with that emptiness. You've learned to be present with the discomfort, to listen to the inner voice, to face the parts of yourself that scare you. And in doing so, you've built something most people never achieve: an actual relationship with yourself. Not the idea of yourself, not the fantasy, the truth. And once you have that, once you know yourself at that level, it becomes almost impossible to tolerate relationships that demand you abandon it. This is the paradox people don't understand. The more comfortable you become with solitude, the more selective you become with company. Because you're no longer willing to trade your peace for approval. You're no longer willing to shrink yourself to fit into spaces that don't honor you. You're no longer willing to engage in relationships where you have to perform, pretend, or hide the essential truth of who you are. And to people who've built their entire social identity on performance and pretense, your refusal looks like rejection. It looks like coldness. It looks like arrogance, or superiority, or emotional unavailability. But it's none of those things. It's simply that you've tasted something real and you refuse to go back to the fake. You've experienced the peace of your own company, and you refuse to destroy it for the comfort of people who don't even know you. That's not coldness. That's clarity. That's the kind of boundary that comes from knowing, not assuming, but knowing what you need to stay whole. Now let's talk about what this actually protects you from, because this is where most people get it wrong. They think your solitude is protection from connection, from love, from intimacy. But that's not what you're protecting yourself from. You're protecting yourself from chaos. From the kind of relational chaos that comes from engaging with people who haven't done their own inner work, who project their unhealed wounds onto you, who demand emotional labor you don't have the capacity to give, who confuse intensity with intimacy and neediness with love. You're protecting yourself from enmeshment, from losing yourself in someone else's dysfunction, from becoming the therapist or the savior or the punching bag for people who refuse to face themselves. You're protecting yourself from the slow erosion that happens when you give more than you receive, when you accommodate more than you're honored, when you stay in relationships out of guilt or obligation, or the fear of being alone, even though being alone would be infinitely healthier. And here's the truth that will probably make some people uncomfortable. The people who judge you for preferring solitude are often the same people who would drain you if you let them close. They're the ones who need your energy to regulate their own. They're the ones who can't sit with themselves, so they demand you sit with them instead. They're the ones who mistake your boundary for cruelty because your peace threatens their chaos. But there's something even more powerful happening beneath all of this. Something most people never recognize because they're too busy pathologizing solitude to see its deeper function. Your preference for being alone is evidence of secure attachment to yourself. In psychological terms, attachment isn't just about how you relate to others. It's about how you relate to yourself, to your own inner world, to your capacity to self-soothe and self-regulate without requiring external validation or constant company. People with secure self-attachment can be alone without feeling abandoned. They can sit in silence without feeling empty. They can enjoy their own company because they've built an internal world rich enough, stable enough, real enough to sustain them. And that's rare. That's incredibly rare. Most people have anxious or avoidant self-attachment, meaning they either can't be alone without spiraling into fear and neediness, or they use aloneness as a defense against intimacy rather than a genuine preference. But you, if you're someone who genuinely prefers solitude, have likely developed something precious: the ability to be a secure base for yourself. You don't need constant external input to feel real. You don't need validation to know you exist. You don't need noise to feel alive. You've cultivated an inner sovereignty that most people spend therapy trying to achieve. And here's where everything starts to shift. When you stop seeing your solitude as a problem and start seeing it as evidence of this inner sovereignty, you stop apologizing for it. You stop explaining it. You stop trying to justify your need for space to people who will never understand it. You simply honor it. You protect it. You build your life around it rather than against it. You choose relationships, if you choose them at all, with people who understand that your need for alone time isn't about them, isn't rejection, isn't distance, but is actually the thing that allows you to show up fully when you do engage. Because people who understand this, people who have their own relationship with solitude, don't take your need for space personally. They respect it. They honor it. They might even share it. And those relationships, the ones built on mutual respect for autonomy and space and the reality that love doesn't require constant presence, those are the relationships worth having. Those are the relationships that don't drain you, that don't demand you abandon yourself, that don't ask you to choose between your peace and their comfort. Those are the relationships that feel like expansion rather than contraction, like freedom rather than obligation, like coming home rather than losing yourself. But let's not romanticize this. Let's be honest about the cost. Because choosing solitude, truly choosing it, means accepting that most people won't understand you. It means sitting with the judgment, the labels, the assumptions people make about who you are, based on the fact that you don't need them the way they think you should. It means facing the loneliness that sometimes comes not from being alone, but from being misunderstood, from knowing that very few people will ever see the truth of what you're protecting, what you're building, what you're becoming in the silence. It means navigating a world that equates social success with constant connection, that treats introversion like a disorder to be fixed rather than a temperament to be honored, that tells you over and over that something is wrong with you for wanting what you want. And some days that weight is heavy. Some days you wonder if they're right. Some days you question whether your preference for solitude is actually wisdom or just fear, dressed up as self-knowledge. And in those moments you have to come back to the only question that matters. Does being alone make me feel more like myself or less? Does solitude expand me or contract me? Does the silence nourish me or deplete me? And if the answer is that solitude returns you to yourself, that it clears the noise so you can hear your own voice, that it gives you the space to process and feel and exist without performance, then you have your answer. Then you know. And knowing that is worth more than all the approval in the world. There's a concept in philosophy called negative capability, coined by the poet John Keats, and it refers to the ability to exist in uncertainty, mystery, and doubt, without the compulsive need to reach for answers or resolution. And people who prefer solitude often possess this in spades. You've learned to sit with the unknown. You've learned to exist in the space between what you've been told you should want and what you actually need. You've learned to tolerate the discomfort of being different, of wanting differently, of moving through the world in a way that doesn't fit the template. And that tolerance, that capacity to sit with uncertainty about how you're perceived, about whether you're doing life right, about whether you'll end up lonely or free, that's a form of psychological maturity most people never develop. Most people need the certainty of the crowd. They need the validation of fitting in. They need the safety of being like everyone else. But you've walked away from that safety. You've chosen the uncertainty of your own path over the false security of the well-worn road. And that takes courage. Real courage. The kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't seek applause, doesn't need recognition. The kind that simply does what's necessary to stay true. So here's what I want you to understand. What I need you to hear if you've ever felt broken or damaged or wrong for preferring your own company. You are not the problem. The world's inability to honor different ways of being is the problem. Your need for solitude isn't emotional damage. It's emotional intelligence. It's your psyche protecting your energy from people and situations that would deplete it. It's your nervous system telling you the truth about what you need to function, to thrive, to remain whole. And the people who judge you for it, who pressure you to be more social, more available, more like them, they're not worried about you. They're worried about themselves. They're worried about what your contentment in solitude says about their need for constant company. They're worried that if you can be happy alone, it exposes the fact that they can't. They're worried that your peace threatens their narrative that connection requires constant presence, that love means constant access, that relationships mean the abandonment of self. But you know better. You've lived the alternative. You've felt the difference between relationships that enhance your life and relationships that consume it. And you've chosen yourself, not out of fear, not out of inability to connect, but out of the deep, essential understanding that the relationship you have with yourself is the foundation for everything else. And if that foundation crumbles in the noise and chaos and demand of others, then nothing real can be built. This is your moment. This is where you stop waiting for permission to want what you want, where you stop apologizing for needing what you need, where you stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable with your difference. You are not obligated to explain your solitude to anyone. You are not required to justify your need for space, for silence, for the restoration that comes from being alone. You are allowed to build a life that honors your energy, your boundaries, your truth, even if that life looks nothing like what others expect. You are allowed to choose quality over quantity in every area of your life, including relationships. You are allowed to say no to invitations, to gatherings, to connections that don't serve you, without guilt, without explanation, without the performance of regret. Because your peace is not negotiable. Your sovereignty is not up for debate. And the people who truly love you, who truly see you, will understand that your solitude isn't rejection of them. It's protection of you. And they'll honor it. They'll respect it. They'll love you not despite your need for space, but because they understand that your space is what allows you to show up as the fullest version of yourself. So let them call you cold. Let them call you distant. Let them misunderstand and misinterpret and project their own fears onto your choices. Because while they're busy judging what they don't understand, you'll be in the silence, building something real. You'll be with yourself, doing the inner work most people avoid their entire lives. You'll be cultivating the kind of self-knowledge and self-acceptance that can't be shaken by external opinion. You'll be living proof that there is another way, that connection doesn't require constant presence, that love doesn't mean losing yourself, that solitude isn't loneliness but the deepest form of coming home. And maybe, just maybe, someone else who feels the same way you do, someone else who's been told their entire life that something is wrong with them for wanting to be alone, will see you living your truth, protecting your peace, honoring your sovereignty, and they'll realize they're not alone in their aloneness. They'll realize that what they've been taught to see as brokenness is actually wholeness, and they'll start to choose themselves too, because that's what this is really about. Not isolation, not disconnection, but the fierce, radical act of choosing yourself in a world that profits from your self-abandonment, of protecting your energy in a culture that demands you give it away freely, of honoring your truth in a society that wants you to perform someone else's version of normal. And if that makes you an outsider, if that makes you different, if that makes you someone others don't understand, then so be it. Because you'll be free, truly free. Free from the exhausting performance of constant availability. Free from relationships built on obligation rather than genuine resonance. Free from the guilt and shame that comes from wanting something different than what you're told you should want. Free to be exactly who you are, in the silence, in the solitude, in the sacred space you've created, where your true self can finally breathe. And that freedom, that peace, that sovereignty over your own life and energy and inner world, that's worth protecting. That's worth honoring. That's worth everything. So protect it, honor it, live it, without apology, without explanation, without compromise, because you are not cold, you are not broken, you are not wrong, you are sovereign. And sovereignty, real sovereignty, is the rarest and most precious thing in this world. Don't let anyone take it from you. If this resonated, if you felt seen, if something shifted inside you while listening, let me know in the comments. Share your experience with solitude, your journey to accepting it, your struggle with being misunderstood. And if you want more content that honors the truth of who you are rather than who you're supposed to be, subscribe. Hit the like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because this conversation, this understanding, this permission to be different, it matters. You matter, your peace matters, and protecting it isn't selfish, it's sacred.